Welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. Every week on this podcast, we talk about all things mental health, sometimes stress or anxiety. Perhaps you're burned out. Well, this is the podcast for you. We sit down with the wonderful counselors at Crosswinds Counseling and have a great conversation every week. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. Joining us today is the very newest counselor at Crosswinds Counseling, Kaley Soule. Kaley, welcome to the podcast and welcome to Crosswinds Counseling.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited that you're here too. And we're talking today about a big topic, a topic that probably drives a lot of people to see a counselor, and that is anger.
Yes.
Something we all deal with at least occasionally. Sometimes we deal with it productively, maybe sometimes less productively. Kaley, start by giving us kind of a big picture comment on anger from a therapist perspective. What do you see when people are dealing with anger, and what are some of your big picture thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, so to kind of understand anger, I like to go into how it processes in our brain first. Our brain can hold so much, and when it comes to anger, our amygdala is kind of what is activated at the forefront of being angry. So the amygdala and the parasympathetic nervous system are activated when some sort of stimulus comes up, and that is our fight or flight response. So our fight or flight response is activated, and it releases catecholamines. This gives us the burst of energy that we need in order to act. And epinephrine and norepinephrine are kind of what give us the symptoms of a flushed face, or our blood vessels will start to constrict a little bit to help conserve energy. So that's kind of how it processes in our brain. The prefrontal cortex also helps with the amygdala, and they work together as a guide. The prefrontal cortex works with our judgment. So the amygdala, if we were just functioning on our amygdala alone, it would be rage. And it would be, very aggressive, impulsive decision making. But our prefrontal cortex steps in and says, hey, I know you're angry, but here's the logical response. Here's what we need to do. So it's working to keep us safe. Both of those, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, are there to keep us safe.
So from a counseling perspective, when you see someone who's dealing with anger, how does understanding that neuroscience and what's happening in our brain, how does that help you come into the conversation so that you can help them?
Yeah. So I like to explain that to people, because for a lot of people, when they say that they're struggling with anger, sometimes they'll be like, I go from 0 to 100. There is no warning signs. There is no in between. I just go from being perfectly fine to really angry at for some sort of reason. And understanding what actually goes on in our brains and being able to be aware of those warning signs can help us navigate how we proceed further. Everyone has their own responses when it comes to warning signs. Some people get sweaty hands. Some people, their heart starts to race. Some people, their voice starts to increase. Some people get really, really quiet when they start to become angry. So knowing how it works in the brain lets people know, hey, I do have warning signs. I do have a process that comes up. It doesn't just explode from nowhere.
Yeah. Knowing yourself seems like one of the biggest steps, just because it might be, and maybe if you're married, you see a different sign in your spouse or in your friend group or whoever your relationships are, you might see a behavior in you that you don't see in others, but knowing that has got to be an important step to dealing with anger in a healthy fashion. Because I assume your perspective would be, anger's not bad. It's okay to be angry, right? It's how we process it. It's how we deal with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe that anger is not a bad emotion in any capacity. There is such a good purpose behind anger. It's such a powerful force in our lives, and we need to feel it. We just need to feel it in a healthy way. anger keeps us safe. It lets us know what our boundaries are. So for example, if I went up to you and say, for some reason, I would never do this, but if I kicked you in the shin.
Okay. I'm glad you would not do that.
I would never do that. But say I went up to you and I kicked you, that would tell you, oh my goodness, like, that's not okay.
Right.
You know, you don't just go up to people and you don't just kick them. You don't just do something like that.
Right.
So it teaches us boundaries. It teaches us, it helps motivate us. The anger releases adrenaline, which makes us like respond to action. It makes us do the next thing. It helps with protection, and it serves as an internal guidance system. It lets us know what our values and our beliefs are.
So how do you get someone who is struggling with anger, first understanding it, understanding what's happening in the brain, understanding their signs? I get that's a good first step to have some awareness of what's happening. But how then do you move to, okay, you're angry, you're not dealing with that in a healthy fashion, it's consuming you, it's hurting others, whatever it is, however it's playing out. How do you get them to then go to, anger's not bad, anger's okay, anger's a natural emotion, but now let's deal with it in a healthy fashion? That's a huge transition. How do you help people make that?
Of course. Yeah, we want our anger to be working for us and not against us. And a lot of people that come into counseling, for a very long time, they have been using the same way of coping to survive, their same way of using anger to survive, and now they've outgrown it. It doesn't serve them anymore. So getting it to work for them, for example, I say that movement is the best medicine. So journaling, and physical movement, this could be going for a walk or exercising, that is releasing energy from our body that needs to be released. Adrenaline won't leave the body unless we are actually moving. It will just stay in there and it will build up. That's why some people, when they do get really upset, it can be explosive over the smallest thing. They aren't releasing it in a healthy way. Yeah. So journaling is a huge one. Channeling the anger into doing something productive, meditation or prayer, that can be another really big thing. Meditation is shown to decrease the risk of heart attack and stroke, which when the amygdala is firing when you're really upset, like I said earlier, your blood vessels constrict, and that's what leads to the increase of heart attack or stroke for people that struggle with it. And also understanding your anger warning signs, which is something I really hone in on with clients. It is so different for everybody, but knowing what those are can help us take the next step into learning how to best navigate it for them, because everyone can cope with it differently. But movement, I would say, is the biggest thing in releasing that from your body.
How often are you working with an individual where anger is the issue versus a couple or a family? I'm imagining that it might be hard as an individual to be aware enough of your own anger and to be aware enough of some of these things and how it plays out in your life to come and see a counselor one-on-one. It seems like, I'll just be fully transparent here. Sometimes my wife helps me see my behavior better than I see it myself. Here's a silly example, but this really happened recently. We were playing a board game with our family. I didn't think I was angry, but I made a comment to our daughter-in-law, and my wife pulled me aside and said, "You need to apologize to her. You were angry with her." And I said, "Really? I didn't feel angry with her. I didn't think." And she said, "Well, you came across as you were angry." Yeah. And I thought, wow, that is not what I intended. So I just wonder, in counseling, if you see a lot of people who are self-aware enough to come in and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with some anger. I'm not processing it well," or if it is something that usually comes up with couples or families where other people are already helping them to see it enough, even just to get into the counseling room.
Yeah, absolutely. I do see a lot of people that have come in and they're usually telling me that thing. "Oh, my wife, my spouse says that I have an anger problem. I don't know what they're talking about." Right. But I will say anger is a secondary emotion. Anger doesn't exist by itself. It's not an emotion that is that's not the only thing you're feeling. That may be what's presented, but that's not the full picture. If in counseling, I'll show the anger iceberg, which is kind of a worksheet. On the top of the iceberg, all you see is anger. Underneath the water, there is so much more. There's hurt, fear, loss, embarrassment, abandonment, loneliness. There's so much underneath anger. So what people are seeing, and I see this a lot with clients, I'll be processing with them and they'll say, you know, I'm just so embarrassed. I'm so sad. I'm so, like, all these different words. And I'll bring up, have you allowed yourself to be angry? Have you felt that anger? And a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, but it shows itself in other capacities. When people are angry and they are showing that, there's always something underneath that too. So I will tie into, hey, is this maybe sadness? Are you feeling lonely? What's underneath that? Is there fear? Is there loss? So that's a big part of.
Yeah, and the iceberg analogy is a good one because, I've heard it said about 90% of the iceberg is not visible. So to your point, there are all these things there, and that may be 90% of the problem. You're seeing the top of the iceberg, the tip, the anger, but you're not seeing all of it that goes into it. So
right.
Yeah, it's a great picture.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't see that until they come to therapy and they start processing and they're like, oh, wow, there is so much underneath this anger. And their loved ones are just seeing sometimes this explosive anger, doesn't know where it's coming from. And a lot of people don't know how to control it. But if we know what's underneath it, that is such a good starting point to healing and getting a better manage on.
Yeah, fascinating topic. It's something we all deal with. Everyone has been angry. Hopefully we're all dealing with it in a healthy way, but that's probably not always the case. So if you would like to see a counselor to talk about anger, Kaley Soule is one of the great options here at Crosswinds Counseling. Like I said, the newest option. You can find her at crosswindscounseling.org. That's where you can find all of the wonderful counselors at Crosswinds as well. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Kaley, thank you for your time today. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more of our podcast. And you can comment in the section below. Perhaps you could share what you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. We've got new episodes coming out every week. So we'll see you next time on Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling.